Lesson 2, Helio Gracie's lesson 2, and the third section is standing up in base. Standing up in base is the most non-combative thing you'll do in all of Helio Gracie's lessons, but it is the most important thing you can do in Jiu-jitsu. Other than learning how to move your hips like this, right? Base is the beginning of all Jiu-jitsu. So we're starting with sitting down because the lesson's called standing up in base. There's a defensive measure here where if I'm sitting and relaxing and Nate would try to approach me within my vision, right? There's a chance that if I get punched or kicked by him, at least I could use this hand as a basic method of deflection. You cannot stay here and expect to do all of your fancy blocks against someone who's standing and has the ground and the leverage and the striking capability as their friend. But it could be something. It could be something just to deflect until I can stand up in base, which looks like this. Right? Standing up in base is important because if I stand up not in base, I fall. Right? Now you may say, well, what's the problem with that? We're jiu-jitsu fighters. We want to take the match to the ground. Why not start on the ground? Right? So that means that if I'm in a bar enjoying a beer with my friends and Nate, the bully, comes in and he wants to fight me, I do this right away. Right? I immediately sit down on the ground of the bar in my Brooks Brothers suit and play my spider guard. Maybe. I don't know. But it's not as realistic or practical to begin in this fashion, especially in a public domain that's not a mat, because there's less awareness there, right? When I'm on my feet, I can easily turn 360 degrees. I have a greater field of vision. Most importantly, I can get away from the scenario. You see, I can walk away from Nate like this, right? A lot faster and with more vision and sensory capability than I can scoot away from Nate's, right? But in this instance, this exercise begins with us sitting on the ground. And one foot is up, and the other hand, and that same side hand is just draped across it. I remember Horion teaching this and always saying 6 to 8 inches from your hip, 6 to 8 inches from your hip. So this hand goes 6 to 8 inches from your hip. It's pretty relaxed, it's casual. A lot of people sit and talk like this, right? Especially on the mat, at the beach, in the park, wherever. And you can be sitting anyway, but if you notice, you may be laying down, reading your book, but if you notice a threat coming, maybe you just sit up. Maybe you just sit up. All of the weight has to go on this hand, so that when I put the weight on the hand, my hips come off the ground. That's it. You should be able to rock a little bit like this. If you can do that, that's a good sign. The trick to standing up in base is to put the knee behind the same side hand, and to not stand up until the knee's behind the hand. Here is what persons who are learning how to stand in base sometimes do. And then they fall again, you see? So it's because the knee doesn't clear the elbow. The knee must clear the elbow. Yes, taller people have a more difficult time. So the trick is going to be to keep your leg bent until the knee's behind the elbow. Then you can put the foot down. And the hand stays on the ground too for base. This would still be there to block until you can stand up. Look, if you do stand up already, don't let me tell you what fighting stance to take, whatever you like. Maybe you're a Muay Thai, maybe you're just a boxer, maybe you're Tang Soo Do, I don't even know how to do that, I guess. Right? If you want to fight, you take your fighting stance. If you want to get away, you're away. If you want to measure your distance the way the jiu-jitsu fighters do, so your hands are out and you're sort of in a pleating motion, which is disarming, but at the same time allows you to measure, you see? Then you can do that. Depends on how the engagement turns, what the relationship is between you and the alleged aggressor at the time. But if you don't stand up in base, you fall. So the most important part of standing up in base is to put the knee behind the elbow. You see, only when the knee is behind the elbow do I let my foot touch the ground. So I don't think, well, I'm almost at the elbow, now I'll put my foot on the ground, because look what happens. This is weird, right? And I fall. I have to move the knee completely behind the elbow. Completely behind it, and then I can put the foot down. And you should end up in a nice wide stance like this. And then you can stand up. Make sense? All right, let's try. Just a modification. If you're having a hard time standing up in base with one hand, you can use two hands. Jiu-jitsu is already in you. You've just forgotten how to move. This is a very natural, inherent movement. Anybody who has kids or who watches kids or has seen a baby learning how to walk, before you can walk, you have to stand, right? And how do you stand? Well, you usually crawl to a location where you can find something to hold on to, and then you stand up. When you don't have something to hold on to, this is what babies do. They crawl on the ground, and then they sit like this, right? And then they put their hands down, and they put their knee behind their elbow, and then they put their foot on the ground, and then they hold on to whatever, and they stand up. You see, so all babies are natural jiu-jitsu black belts. That is the foundational way that humans move from a sitting to a standing position as you're learning the fundamental process of walking. So for me, it gives me extra faith that standing up in base is the correct way to get up when you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You can use two hands. If you're having a hard time balancing all of your weight comfortably on one arm and rocking back and forth, you can just take this position here and put both hands on the ground, 1, 2, right? And then lean your head over your hands until the leg gets light. And then put your knee outside your elbow, put the foot on the ground, and walk yourself up. Now, of course, in the originally conceived self-defense application for this, you now lose the blocking capability of that arm. But what's more important is that you learn how to stand up in base. What's more important is that you learn how to move your hips. What's more important is that you understand what it means to be in base so that you feel solid and you can't be moved. Because that base will happen everywhere in Jiu-Jitsu. Right now we're talking about it on the feet, but it will happen when you're on the ground. And if you have a solid base, you're going to be a much more thorough grappler. And that base begins with understanding the relationship between your feet and the ground, right? Which translates into the relationship between your feet and your hips, which translates into the relationship between your hips and your shoulders, right? So focus on this. If you can't do one, like this, right? Do two. 1, 2. Knee behind the elbow and stand. All right, that's it. Go ahead, give it a try.